In Melbourne, Lewis's Continental Kitchen in Bondi, you might recall, was the subject of an arson attack. It was one of Iran's targets. That's the allegation being made by ASIO. Alex Ryvchin is the co-chief executive of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. Very good morning to you, Alex.
Good morning, Hamish.
So you've been in touch with the owners of Lewis's Continental Kitchen. What's their reaction to this news?
They're really distressed and shaken up by it. I mean, I spoke to them just minutes after the press conference by the Prime Minister and the Director General of ASIO, and they reached out to me. They were already getting media inquiries and they were a bit kind of overwhelmed by it all. And I thought initially that perhaps the revelation that the Iranian regime was behind it would bring them some measure of closure. But it really, I think, had the reverse effect. It really worried them. They're still fearful for their safety and the future of their business. Because on the one hand, you want to know who's behind this. And for a long time, the Jewish community has pleaded for answers to understand exactly why we were targeted, how we were targeted, is there an ongoing risk to the community? And then when you learn that it's the Iranian regime, something that is so wicked and has committed such atrocities throughout the world, and that they honed in on the Jewish community here, it's deeply unsettling to learn that.
So obviously when this wave of attacks first started to occur in Sydney, clearly there was a great deal of very understandable alarm. Is there some mixed feelings amongst the Jewish community in Sydney this morning about the fact that it appears to be, and obviously the government is pointing to the possibility that more of these attacks were directed from outside? Is there some mixed feelings about this, in that maybe it indicates this isn't necessarily an organic, local anti-Semitic wave, although fair to point out as well that the government is saying that they don't suspect all of the attacks were directed from outside?
That's not the way it's going to be interpreted by the community. And, we heard similar things put to us after the revelation that the Jewel caravan incident was non-viable and that organised crime was involved. That didn't cause comfort in the community, knowing that organised crime, people with access to guns, were carrying out these attacks. And now learning that the Iranian regime is also a part of the puzzle, no one feels more safe from it. I think, if anything, it shows the complexity, the durability, the tenacity of anti-Semitism, and how it has the capacity to absorb so many different elements: foreign actors, organised crime, local anti-Semites, crooks for hire. All these sorts of things can descend on the Jewish community. So it just speaks to the uniqueness of anti-Semitism and how threatening and menacing it is to us.
Alex, your former home was targeted over the summer. Have these revelations cast new light on the circumstances of that for you?
We haven't heard from ASIO or the police or the government that that particular incident is linked to the regime as well. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that. For a long time, there's been intelligence and reports throughout the world that the Iranian regime plans to target Jewish leaders and Jewish communal facilities throughout the world. So again, when the police announced early on that they were investigating the potential for foreign interference and foreign leads, the Iranian regime very much became the prime suspect. So we'll await new information as it comes to light. But there's, again, a great deal of trepidation in the community and a concern that this threat is ongoing, that given how many people were involved at various levels, have they all been apprehended? Is there an ongoing risk to the community? These are all questions that we really want to have answered.
I know you're here speaking in your formal capacity. I'm just wondering on a personal level how it's making you think about. There must be so many questions in your own mind about what happened at your former home.
The brutal honesty, Hamish, is that there's been so much happening in my life and, in my professional capacity, speaking on behalf of the community, that I probably haven't had time to properly pause and reflect on that incident. I think, processed it as another attack on the Jewish community. So maybe that's for the best, to not dwell on these things too much and think about personal safety and family safety. The community was aching from the attack, and a lot of people reached out in solidarity, not just in the Jewish community, but wider Australia and around the world, and that meant a lot to me. But I'm primarily concerned for the welfare of the community that I'm honoured to represent and what happens in this country.
Obviously, the government and intelligence chiefs have been at pains to provide some sense of certainty, security for Australians in the wake of these revelations. What are you saying within your own community about safety, about ongoing fears? Obviously, the government's taken some steps, or the steps that are available to them, in terms of designating the Revolutionary Guard as a terror organisation, expelling the Iranian ambassador. Um, does this change the picture in any way for Sydney's Jewish community?
It's difficult to know, just because we don't know whether the threat is ongoing. We don't know how many of these people are still out there. We don't know. And the other thing is that, as we've seen throughout history and around the world, anti-Semitism has so many different sources, and it can come at any time from various actors and political ideologies and religious extremists. So with this kind of febrile environment, the threat never really subsides. We don't want to raise alarm in the community. We don't want to cause hysteria, but we don't want to mislead people either. And as new information has been coming to light, it hasn't really calmed the community, because every new revelation seems to be so disturbing and reveals new layers of complexity and diabolical actors being involved. So the community, obviously, they look to us for that guidance, and they look to the police and to the government as well. But they also read the press, they sense what's happening on the street, and they draw their own conclusions. And the community has shown remarkable tenacity and resilience throughout. The fact that they've gone on with their lives, they've lived proudly as Jews and Australians. But I'd be lying if I said that people weren't concerned. And learning that the Iranian regime targeted the Australian Jewish community alarms them further.
I suspect a lot of people might be wondering, of all the things that Iran is accused of doing on the global stage, why would they be targeting Jewish people here in Sydney?
This is very much part of their methods of operating, and has been for a long time. When you look at the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that's the permanent revolution component of the Iranian regime, and it has always sought to project Iranian power outwards, to destabilize society, to attack Jewish targets and Israeli targets throughout the world. You look at back in 1994, they blew up the Amia Community Center, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, and killed scores of people, absolutely devastated that community. This is what they do. They target the Jewish community, they target Israelis, they target Western sources throughout the world. They seek to destabilize, they seek to force communities to cast doubt on themselves, to rip societies apart. This is very much what they do and who they are, and that's why it's so important that they're now treated as a terrorist organization.
So do you think in that sense they've succeeded? Because there has been this discord, this disharmony here in Sydney this year, the end of last year as well, when these attacks were occurring. And it's clear that they created huge amounts of confusion and really a very strong current of discord in our community that, I think has widely been observed as unusual and unique in Sydney.
The sad reality, Hamish, is that terrorism works, and we've seen that throughout history. And when you have in peaceful neighborhoods, in a civilized democratic society like ours, fire bombings of synagogues, of businesses, of cars, targeting homes, that is going to cause panic in communities. There's no question. It's going to force people to question their future in this country. It's going to have people leveling accusations at others and lead to false flag accusations and paranoia and disinformation. That's what terror does. That's why it's so effective. And that's why terrorist organizations renew their attacks over and over again. They know that's how you destabilize the society. That's how you bring attention to your political cause. And in many cases, governments kind of go along with that, and they receive the political outcomes that they were seeking.
Is it a lesson, though, also for us all in slightly giving space to the authorities to investigate and actually find the sources of these things? Obviously, there was, a lot of discussion, a lot of commentary, and I think a lot of hypothesizing in the public domain about this, particularly over the summer, in all sorts of different directions. I guess I'm wondering if it does say to us all, look, sometimes this stuff is incredibly complicated and hard to pin down, and the best thing we can do in terms of social harmony and making sure everyone here does feel safe is give intelligence agencies, police, the time and space to actually follow those leads.
Look, of course, that's desirable. And of course, you would want all the facts to come to light before people draw conclusions. But human beings are human beings. And when you see a caravan packed with explosives, when you see synagogues torched, when you see cars daubed with F the Jews and set alight, people are going to panic, and people are going to beg for answers. And We as a community have cried out for answers and for details all the way through. We've urged the authorities to do whatever they can to get to the bottom of this. And it seemed that anytime there was a new revelation, for example, the role of organised crime, it just asked more questions than it answered. But at the same time, we know without a shadow of a doubt that the authorities were doing everything they could to investigate this, to keep us all safe. But this was clearly an extremely complex investigation, and it took a long time for them to get the definitive evidence which they could then present to the public and have the government act upon. But obviously, you know, you want people to be calm and not jump to conclusions, but human beings are fallible as well. And when they see such chaos and disorder, things that have never happened in Australia before, such violent targeting of communities, people are going to obviously feel a certain way and they're going to speak their minds. That's inevitable.
Alex Ryvchin, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.